Well, hello there. I heard you wanted to see what happens in the third and final match between Neblime and Hamster on Germination. And I mean, there were like 6 games on this map, but I cherry picked 3. Let's take a look at this particular one. We've got Hamster in the top left as the Protoss, Neblime in the bottom right as the Zerg here. And hey, guys, did you miss the announcement? The fraud launcher has been updated. Our Discord server is thrumming with activity. We are regularly getting up to a very high number of matches per day, and it's only gonna get bigger than that. Because people's families have started happening, you know, we got people's cousins and brothers and cousin brothers and brother cousins, and they're all playing Cosmonarchy. And I know that's a lot of Americans, but I promise there's a lot of other people playing too. So hop on in if you're interested. Of course, you want to see what the future of the RTS is all about. Yes, that's how bold we are. Now, something that is interesting about this gateway placement here from Hamster that I'll comment on is I'm pretty sure he did kind of the same thing in the previous match. And your Zealots and Legionnaires and those kinds of units can't actually make it between the bottom left corner of the gateway and the terrain, which could end up being a bit of a problem. But at the same time, it kind of funnels those small worker-sized units like Zetracors and maybe Quasilisks through that little canal, if you want to call it that. So it's not a Zerg tight wall, but it is something that if you funnel them through there, and they'll take like the path of least resistance or something, you could maybe use that, you know, to your advantage. And Neblime has been doing a little bit of rush aggro early play, so it's worth thinking about. I mean, his pool is coming up after his hatch is a little under halfway done. Oh man, I cannot wait to have this as a feature, but eventually we're actually going to have the seconds remaining in like a number over here on the control panel here in the bottom middle, and that is just going to be beautiful. It should also work in replays, but for sure it'll end up working for the actual players. So hey, I talked about these bushes in the last video. I did in fact remember to get those bushes updated after the cast over. So you know what? I'm just really good at this sort of thing. I was about to say at this game, probably not the case, but I'm really good at the development part of the game, I swear. So just so you know. And we do have a Droleth moving across the map for Neblime. He is, of the games that we casted, the winner of the majority of them, it seems. Obviously, I have not looked through the shorter ones. And soon we'll be on to a different set of maps. I'm going to be taking a look at some solo matches that are just like, you know, played one-off instead of submitted as a series. There's a bunch of matches with Neblime and the Shambler, a couple matches between Newt and Three Crow. I want to say there's like a Hamster Newt or something like that in there. Anyway, I'll go ahead and take a look at my catalog after this. Dracodon pops out just to tickle the Droleth. Not going to get through the shields on that bad boy. And a Warden has already been placed, this time more closer to the ramp, as you can see. Something to keep in mind. Is there going to be a bit of a march out? No, it looks like Neblime is just going to be content to hold the sort of midsection here of his base. Thinking about maybe going for a fast third. Wants to use the defenses that he has in his disposal, or to his disposal. But you know, I think he's made the switch over to workers at this point. It's pretty clear. Maybe he's thinking about where to put his next round of static defense, as he often does like to put down the static defense. But yeah, there's the fast third base. Right to specification, second gateway. It does feel like Hamster has gone for this economic build, but he hasn't pressured with his first 2 Dracodons. And as a result, he can't really know this because he didn't go ahead and rescout. But he has no idea that he could march across the map and pressure the very low number of military units here with, you know, like 2 Dracodons beats like, I want to say like 8 Quasis, even with the cliff advantage, assuming you can stab in there and charge in. He should move out with 3 at the very least, I think, but he might decide to wait. He looks like he's going to be gearing up for an embassy. There it is, waiting for the Vespene for that. Obviously, it's a little bit slow to get the Vespene on this particular map, because on this version, the geyser is too far away from the starting location, and on top of that, there's no ridge, but that has been adjusted in the at least the ridge particular part has been adjusted going forward, so something that you don't have to worry about as much moving into things. And hey, looking at these lovely birth animations that Solstice made for the Quasilisk, it's worth noting that another thing that I ended up doing kind of recently was adding a lot of birth animations for the Zerg units that have just been missing them for a very long time. You can actually see Hamster saturating the gas first on his natural and adding another gateway. So it looks like maybe we're going to end up seeing some heavy Dracodon play with the early gas going for, I want to say like a Stargate or something, although there is a witness, so that's going to be early 50 or 75 gas or so. The Ovaleth is going to make it across the map, and that will, of course, scout the you can, when you detect something, you can see the unit in production, so it'll actually tell Neblime that a witness is about halfway done. You get to see the progress bar and everything. Dracodon going to go ahead and tickle this. Again, I do think that you don't necessarily want to overreact with all of your units in case the Ovileth is a bit of a bait to pull your Dracodons away. But I think it would be safe to take your a couple of your Dracodons and really try to pressure this Ovileth and zone it away. You know, bring its health down a lot. And the other thing that's worth noting is that really, with the Witness coming out, Hamster has been in the dark about what his opponent is doing for a very long time. And in the first game, Total Worker Death, that was the video. You may notice that this kind of looks eerily familiar with the units kind of branching off. At the very least, Hamster is checking his corners, so to speak. But he is leaving his front gates open. And if there was a move out over here on the north side of the map, they could just swoop right on into the natural and kill a bunch of workers again. Very similar, honestly, to what had happened before. Neblime is going to go ahead and confirm no fourth base on the way. And there's the Stargate we were thinking about. That is something that you do see versus Zerg, particularly the Gladius is a very powerful air unit versus the Quaz branch of the tech tree for the Zerg. And, you know, we have a Hydrath Den already completed. The Hydralisks are in production. So it's not going to be unwinnable, right? The Stargate itself isn't even done yet. So definitely a situation there where you got to keep that in mind. Hamster was keeping his money a little bit in the floating zone so he could get his third base up and running. And that's something that Neblime will be familiar with. The Witness, unfortunately, barreling directly into the path of a second Ovileth, funnily enough. So that is a bit awkward for Hamster, as he will no longer have the ability to spy on his opponent, but he will just make a charge up, a beeline up this ramp. Neblime, he's taking his sweet time to react to this. A little bit awkward there for both players, I think, as they were trying to make sure that they could get up there on the front line. Here come the Legionnaires joining the fray a little bit faster thanks to that Hatcherosk being targeted. Here, a bunch of workers pulled from the natural, see if they can kill this without losing too many combat units. And that's kind of an interesting choice from Neblime, because in theory you could get your workers focused down. But if you manage to keep more of your military alive, it increases the likelihood that a very fast flood of Tier 1 units could end the game in favor of Neblime. We'll see if that's what he wants to end up going for, as obviously we do have a pretty large number of production structures coming up. It looks like we're at going up to be, is that 6 hatches, if I'm not mistaken? So, you know, it's a pretty good number for that early level of production. You compare that to just the 3 gates and the Stargate. Not exactly the most, you know, the strongest ability to keep his mineral count low. I would love to see maybe a Grand Library over here or something as he fully saturates that geyser in the main. We've got some static defense going to warp in over here as our intrepid Protoss survivors return home from their tired sortie. And actually, this Zeth is occasionally getting tickled by the return path for the workers. That's really funny. So obviously, Hamster will then know, okay, yeah, we're definitely in an awkward position here as my third base is confirmed by my opponent. That's something that it can be really nice to just move the Witness across the map, or across your third base and clear that, even if you don't feel like sweeping it for every possible little spot that a Zerg unit could be burrowed. Second Stargate coming, and 4th and 5th Gateway. I like to see that. Going to be going up to larger numbers of production. Remember, in Cosmonarchy, you have multi-building select, so you do want to be able to, I mean, you can just put a bunch of these gateways on one control group and go nuts. It's funny because you compare this to... It just kind of shows you where people come from, because obviously the Brood War people are coming into this and they're like, oh my god, this is amazing. You know, this is so, you know, maybe they're dubious as to whether or not it's very skillful, but at the very least they'll be like, holy shit, this is incredibly, you know, it's so much more, yeah, I guess easier in some ways to actually build out my army and build out my units. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that great? And then there's going to be the StarCraft 2 crowd that are like, I can't hit tab. It doesn't have smart casting. What the hell's going on? So it's just funny to get like completely different reactions depending on where the RTSs that these people originally played. Hamster, for example, is more of a StarCraft 2 player, although he's, to his credit, he just basically never complains about anything. Neblime, on the other hand, has always been a Brood War guy. He did play a lot of StarCraft 2 in the past, but in recent history, all Brood War all the time. So we do have, of course, the Tech Center coming in, halfway done. The Kagra bug spreading onto the terrain, like I mentioned, that's something that got resolved later on in this map's history, so no worries about that. I drew attention to the fact that technically these tar cliffs were also buildable, but I don't think we'll ever see that because the Zerg are not going to put a hatch down there. But there's a pretty sizable ball of Dracodons. We get a very small number of melee units, and we obviously have 5 Gladiuses coming up, as well as a couple of Wardens. There is going to be a bit of a Zerg move out over here. and the Iral Iris is complete. So we're going to have to, you know, take a little bit of a moment here. I don't really think an attack is going to come anytime soon from the Zerg. You know, Neblime isn't really the type of person to go for tier 2, wait for it to finish, and then not use it, and instead attack with all of the tier 1 units. And the Gladius count growing is actually really scary for the Zerg player. You don't really want to go up against like a really heavy stack of Gladiuses without some way of verifiably diving upon the enemy and killing them. And that could be something like a ball of Nathra cores or Skithra cores, but those are very gas-intensive solutions. You might even go for something like Muta-Vith, something like that, where you evolve your Skithra cores into Vithrilisks. But he's not evolving his Hydrathen, so he's not going to have access to that particular answer. Okay, well, you know what? I just noticed he's making the Alcag Eteth, and that gives you 2 options versus what you could, you know, you could make 2 different things versus the Gladius stack. You could go Kagralisks, which are really good burst strains, or you could go for Almaxilisks, which are flyers, and they also do some pretty solid burst damage. There's a Quasilisk Bird over here that's probably going to get stepped on in just a moment. There you go. And you can see the Gladius is immediately zoning away this tier 1 army. There's another flank coming in from about the middle of the map, but you got to watch out for that because Kagralisks are in production. You do see the Tethvith Swamp in production as well. That's the evolution of the Hydra Den that is going to give access to those Vithrilisks, the Devourer graphic, if people are familiar with that. Now, 9 Gladiuses, that's a pretty meaty number. There is the Spear Tith bouncing attacks a lot, but I don't know that it's going to be enough. Obviously, the Gladiuses have that channeled Infini Bounce, and they do need to cycle back over here to handle the flank, which is coming in at a pretty good time here for Neblime to fully surround, and now the Gladius count is starting to dwindle. But the longer this fight continues, and with these Zealots jumping into the fight at any time, particularly with the auto aggro, you can see that bounce stuff stacked up so very hard. Sure, the Zealots end up getting melted by the Hydras eventually, but look, these ones are low HP, so you keep 5 Gladiuses alive. Back at home, it doesn't look like there are any. Okay, 2 more coming across the map. So this attack still has some legs, but you definitely need more Zealots, more frontline, to charge down these Speartith Cesians. Otherwise, you're just going to have your army bounced to death. The Kagralisks out also means that, again, their weapon range is a little bit higher than that of the Hydralisk, right? You look at the Hydra, it's only 5 range. You look at the Kagralisk, it's 6. Doesn't sound like a lot, but the Gladius itself is only 5 range. So as Hamster clears out spots for his 4th base, obviously Neblime's has already been up and has just finished his gas cap. 2 Gladiuses revealing themselves over here. It's a little bit awkward for Hamster, but he's going to go ahead and pull them out without taking any damage to the hulls. And again, the Gladius stack over here, you don't necessarily want to engage this as Neblime, especially if Hamster redoubles his efforts and gets those other 2 on the front line. But it looks like the Zealots are going to be sacrificed up at the altar. A scribe even zoning away, saying, "Get out of my town, get out of my house, I did 4 damage," or 14 damage or something. There we go, finally gets slapped down. And 6 Gladius is still staying alive. We got a bit of a flank coming in from the bottom. The armor on the Gladius isn't splendid, but it's the same as the Dracodon, so things like Quasis aren't really going to do a whole lot of damage, and things like Bactylisks are also not going to do a whole lot of damage. Surprisingly, though, Hamster actually ends up canceling that, even though it was pretty high HP. It was pretty close to completion. Now, I guess maybe he didn't want to risk end up totally losing it to reinforcements, but you might have wanted to bleed your opponent out a little bit, you know, force him to commit to get that cancel off, you know, reunite your Gladiuses off here, maybe start queuing up some more Zealots and such, and then go from that second production cycle, because I think it would be dying about now, if that gives you any idea of how much time he actually had to defend it. So he will be down a base. The Zerg stretching out its legs, getting a little bit more advantaged. We do have about a 20 worker lead in favor of Neblime, who is putting down his Matravel nest. I was going to comment on that not being here, but I knew he would have it eventually. You know, he just loves his nest, I swear. Big force coming in and amassing up in the middle of the map. We are starting to get to that 100 military, you know, triple-digit count for the Zerg player. Protoss lagging behind quite a bit, but the quality of their army is starting to get much higher with things like Amaranths coming out. And those, if they can get onto the field, they can absolutely sustain through a lot of damage, particularly versus Quasis, Kagralisks, Bactylisks, that sort of thing. So, you know, the armor pen of the Kagralisk does mean that it deals full damage, but still, you know, you think about the attack rate, that's the main thing that favors the Amaranth, if they can get onto it in time. Witness spotting, that 9 o'clock, or 3 o'clock rather, is taken. This in-between base here on the 4th is not taken, and Almaxilisks are arriving. I don't think Neblime meant for this to happen, because he is going to end up losing a bunch of these. You can see the bounces doing quite a bit of damage. And here comes the counter-engage. Might have pulled his trigger a little bit too soon. There is a huge phalanx of Zealots that have lined up here to stop this push from getting too far. The Gladius is getting all their bounces off to deal with those Almaxilisks. We got 2 more joining the fray, but is it going to be enough? The ground army still very, very strong for our Protoss player. The Nexus finishes. He's not going to be able to cancel it this time. He's committed to the fight, and he has almost, he has a whole control group, a classic StarCraft 1 control group of 12 Gladiuses, by the way. Looks like maybe some of them have started to fall, but I don't think that Neblime can break this position anymore. He's going to see if he can flank the third in the meanwhile, but we're going to keep our eyes on this fight for now. The Amaranth's charging on down. That's a done deal. Engram over here. Can it be infested is the question. Without power, it's not very useful. Doesn't look like Neblime's even going to go for it. Ends up getting that ensnaring brood proc to slow down the attack rate of the Engram. That allows all of this very, very squishy, splash-prone tier 1 Zerg to make a lot of value. Really getting value out of that specialist. However, I don't think the worker count is going to fall too low. Does look like maybe we've lost 10 or so in this fight, but the Gladiuses are here to ward off the rest of this, and there is no counterattack in play for Neblime. He doesn't have anything else to keep this one going. He's only now letting enough tier 1 units out of his base to see if they can do anything. There's going to be a bit of a run by heading southbound, going to see if it can step on 6 o'clock, and we're starting to get into that territory where players are walking past each other, not necessarily meeting in the middle of the map, seeing if they can outmaneuver each other so that they can get some value done. And here come the, again, this attack is kind of the same play over here. We do get 2 cancels on that. I'm not sure it's super important with the 1500 mineral flow for both players, but look at that. Look at all the Gladiuses. They're really starting to mass up to a critical number. And again, both of our players could have so many more units. Unfortunately, a couple of scribes are going to get mopped up here in that position. I'm not sure that there's really going to be too much done over here at 6 o'clock because the army is here. It's not like Hamster immediately dispatched all of the rest of his units down here, but it's still going to be enough for now. It's still going to be enough for Neblime to hold on. And it did some damage. He kept most of these units alive. He didn't just throw them away. We have got an Ancestral Archives being deployed. I'm looking around for it. Yeah, back in the main. And that means that we are going to see the Patriarch out. The Patriarch applies a debuff that any unit which deals damage to the debuffed unit will start to get shield steal. So that, you can imagine, is just kind of a force multiplier for things like Amaranths, which already had passive shield steal. But it also helps your ranged units stay alive. Admittedly, the only ranged unit here is the Patriarch itself and, of course, the Gladiuses. This base now going to be in question. There is a pretty big force massed up over here, but does it have the maneuverability? We see 12 Almaxilisks. You're going to need to be able to focus fire down the Gladiuses specifically, and the Patriarch is here to dish out splash damage versus stacked air. So this is something that is going to have to be careful of. It looks like the Almax have gone over to 6 o'clock to see if they can preemptively staff and protect that base, but that's a brilliant distraction from Hamster with all of his Gladiuses still pretty much alive. The Almax trying to do their best to see what they can accomplish, but the bounce is proccing all of that Patriarch shielding. That's going to keep most of the Gladiuses alive. The majority of them have stayed alive, and the Almax, on the other hand, have fallen. But it looks like the ground army has been dealt with thanks to all the static defense and the remaining reinforcements. So only a couple Legionnaires here to peel off, and 6 Gladiuses staying alive there. The reinforcements from Neblime, the rest of the production cycles being waypointed down to 6 o'clock. See if he can hold on to this base. Ooh, it's a bit of a barn burner right now, but hey, 3 o'clock still in danger. He needs another round of reinforcements to head up over there. Worker count has been stabilized for both players now, despite Neblime having more bases. It looks like he'll clean up 6, but this base, whew, it has suffered quite a bit, and he's going to need to spend way more workers if he's going to want to hold on to that in the future. 12 o'clock now, potentially being set up by our Protoss player. He hardly has any defenses down here in his 4th. Needs to start thinking about taking a 5th base. Zealot being poked around by an Almaxilisk. It might belie that this 4th base is going to be attacked. I'm looking around for any reinforcements, but all I see is a Monument of Sin in production. That Engram going to be able to do some damage to soften up the Izira cores. That'll make the Gladius' jobs a little bit easier. Yeah, it looks like the Izira cores are going to fall behind. See if they can't regroup. We still have a couple of witnesses scattered around the map. And remember, the Monument of Sin doesn't just make everybody's favorite glassing cannon. It makes the Anthelion, which can teleport to anywhere you have vision. So these witnesses start to become significantly more powerful and as an important tool to deny if the game gets to that level of tech. Not something that I'm thinking Neblime has in his head right now. Zerg Shambler. So if you guys don't know, there's a chance for your worker to become a Shambler. It looks like it happened twice here because it gets you know, carried over to the name of the static defense structure or whatever structure it makes. Love that. Apparently, Beaver said his cousin's first structure that he made was a pool, and it was called that. And so that must have been confusing for him. He must have had no idea. 6 o'clock continuing to hold pretty strong so far. Zealots getting a lot of value in the mid stages of this game. Zethracor's flooding the map as well, seeing if they can't offer a little bit of buffer to the rest of the army. But actually getting in the middle of this reinforcement point is really, really good for Hamster, because his opponent is going to need to see if he can engage with a little bit more, I guess, oomph, I want to say. The Matrolets can go down here, and they will. Patriarch is going to get surrounded by Zets, but look at how easy it is for the splash damage from those units to find value over here. Kagralisks are going to shell some of these melee units down on the way out, but it looks like the fact that the Patriarchs got out without losing any of those high-value units, I don't think any Gladiuses went down. If they did, it wasn't that many. I mean, that's a pretty big move there for our Protoss player. And meanwhile, we've got tier 3 on the way for Neblime. Is the game going to go the whole distance? This bottom left location going to get canceled out by those Zealots and Amaranth. Meanwhile, more defenses starting over here for the 4th, at the 4th for Hamster, and he is going to see if he can hold with just the Gladiuses and reinforcing melee units. I think it's probably going to be enough, because the Kagralisks are busy trying to deal with the Zealots, and the Zealots are not actually the primary target here. The Patriarchs keeping those front lines alive a lot more than they would normally. Remember when I said that the Matrolets made it so that those Zets were significantly better at dealing with things like engrams, something that would normally just completely mop the floor with them? That's because they had the Matroleth there to support them. Well, the kind of the same deal goes for Zealots, Amaranths, other melee units when you're thinking about pairing them with something like a Patriarch, because it just makes it so much harder for those units to die. However, the Matroleth is over here, and it is going to get ambushed directly on top of these gateways. This is a really, really scary attack without the Gladiuses, but they have arrived, so it shouldn't be that much longer before everything goes kaput. And I don't think they're going to have the necessary damage to bring down this Nexus. I think it should be just enough here, but a Star Sovereign is more than 50% of the way done, and Hamster is indeed going to hold this base as predicted. Another bit of a counterattack starting, but there's so many melee units waiting over here to protect this wounded Nexus, and yet again, Neblime thinking about taking more bases. He's only been able to stab into the top right as far as his territory is concerned, and more Gladiuses have even arrived. So it looks like we are actually going to be just fine back here, especially since the reinforcements are streaming on in from 12 o'clock. Some of these Gladiuses may be overcommitting a little bit. They are going to get bopped as the front line retreats. We've got more and more Patriarchs joining the fray. Doesn't really matter that some of them have frontlined, because it looks like they're all going to be just fine. Thanks again, in large part, due to that area that they have, that passive behavior that they have to debuff those units, make them into shield batteries, turn your enemies into shield batteries. Love to see that. Some units going to get caught in translation over here, but there's so many of them that it almost doesn't even matter. Meanwhile, Neblime is taking every single goddamn thing he can off the tech tree. He's got the Mutat Spire. He's got the Matraval Nest. This version of the game, and when they played this, does have the evolved Alkagiteth, the Chokrul Chazal. We'll see if that ends up coming to fray. I'll keep an eye on the production tab for that. But we also need to see whether Hamster is going to go for another base. I'm not 100% sure that he is. He seems trying to see if he can maybe grind Neblime down, but he has no idea that the top right is being taken. He's got a really nice situation for his Patriarchs to benefit from cliff advantage, and even though his Gladius count isn't as high as it once was, it's still going to be more than enough to really, really zone these guys out. And the Star Sovereign has arrived. Its passive missiles do a little bit of splash, its main gun does not. But the real big, scary thing that you have to worry about when you see a Star Sovereign is, will it get over my base and start the glassing attempt? And you can see, Neblime is trying to see if he can focus it down. If his Matrolets can get on top of it and infest it, he can turn it on his opponent. But it looks like the Patriarch's still keeping the Zealots alive for a very long time. You can see the spellcasts being attempted over there as the Star Sovereign returns to the back line and turns back around. The front line being grinded down, but there's only Quasilisks left. Neblime has bled through all of his heavy hitters. And now the static defense going to get collapsed upon by the Gladiuses, by the Patriarchs, and the Star Sovereign is still intact, only taking a little bit of hull damage. We've got a bit of a move out over here towards this 6 or 3 o'clock position yet again, and it looks like 6 o'clock is going to get glassed. The only thing here to try to do some damage are Quasilisks, and they can't break the armor. That is going to do the job. Some Orchestra Cores have arrived. Here's the critical thing. Orchestra Cores infest passively, just based on their attack. So this Star Sovereign is now Neblime's. Now that is what I call, you know, life gives you lemons. Sure, your base got glassed. I'll take that, though. And here we go. It looks like Hamster doesn't want him to run away with it. The glassing is going to see if it can get commenced, but no, he's just going to turn it and try to attack. It doesn't look like it's going to be enough, and the Orchestra cores are going to eventually melt. A couple of Gladiuses did get infested off of that, but that's going to be more than enough. With this 3 o'clock base staying alive, a couple of these units just harassing this area. It does look like the one Gladius is going to reveal top right being taken. So Neblime needs to respond on many fronts. He's maybe overcommitted to try to respond to all of this attacking happening in the top right, but he's got 4K minerals, not able to spend it on anything of value. The Tosvril Haunt has been started. Could we see Sovrelets to try to bail his opponent out? I'm not sure. I think Hamster might be able to make the death push here, especially with these Orchestra cores going down so fast thanks to the Patriarchs. They're going to just splash him down immediately. A bunch of Quasis, but you need more than Quasis right now, my man. 10 Zoracors started, but I think it's too late. The third base falling. And sure, you've got a lot elsewhere, but you're still hemorrhaging workers and everything else. The Patriarchs have kept themselves alive versus nothing but Tier 1 Zerg. There needed to be way more for Neblime, and he calls GG with Hamster taking the game. Now that was a cool fucking match of Cosmonarchy. I hope you guys appreciated it as well as myself. Whew, because I did. I certainly did. Well, there you go. Germination, yet again, a map that has been added to the pool for the Gauntlet, and we will see if it ends up showing up in any of those Gauntlet matches. I have cast a couple of the Gauntlet matches, so you will be seeing those take the place of traditional castovers. Leave me some feedback on that, whether you want to have the traditional castovers as separate and the Gauntlet matches can be uploaded alongside them or whatever. Let me know what's up. I'll be seeing you guys very soon for more Cosmonarchy.